The one who watches. The youth in the seminary. The air in the seminary classroom was thick with the scent of old books and stale incense, a familiar comfort for most, but a growing confinement for young Ramon. Father Antonio, a stoic, silver-haired theologian, stood at the lectern, his voice a droning cadence as he expounded on the eschatological certainties of heaven and hell. And so, Father Antonio intoned, adjusting his spectacles, we arrive at the ultimate destiny of the soul, promised by Christ himself, eternal salvation or eternal damnation. He paused, scanning the rows of earnest young faces. The Church has elucidated these truths over millennia, providing clear pathways to redemption and stark warnings against perdition. Ramon, however, felt a chill that had nothing to do with damnation. His mind, even then, wrestled with logic and inconvenient facts. He remembered a dusty, forgotten text from the seminary's restricted section, a treatise on ancient folk magic, gleaned from a recent excavation. It described how village witches, long before the Church stamped out their practices, would meticulously concoct their sacred oils, herbs steeped under specific lunar phases, then strained and infused with prayers, sealed in blessed vials. The process was almost eerily similar to the preparation of chrism oil, the consecrated oil used by priests for sacraments like baptism and anointing the sick. Both involved specific ingredients, blessings, and an intent to imbue physical matter with spiritual power. It was these quiet, unsettling similarities between ancient pagan practices and the bedrock rituals of the Catholic Church that began to cloud Ramon's mind, sowing seeds of doubt. The existence of heaven and hell, Father Antonio's certainties, suddenly seemed less like divine revelations and more like well-crafted narratives, designed to guide behavior. If the fundamental methods were so alike, where did the divine truly begin and human invention end? He saw it everywhere, once his eyes were opened. The sprinkling of holy water in Catholic rites, cleansing and protecting, echoed the lustrations performed in ancient Roman and Greek temples, where priests purified supplicants before sacrifices. The revered saints, each invoked for specific ailments or needs, felt uncannily akin to the localized deities or spirits of ancient polytheistic pantheons, a sacred intermediary for every earthly problem. The pervasive use of candles and incense, filling the air with fragrant smoke and casting flickering light, was not unique to Christian worship. It was a universal ritual practice, common in Egyptian temples, Roman households, and countless mystery cults for millennia, connecting the material to the ethereal. Even the very calendar of the Church seemed built upon older foundations. Christmas, the celebration of Christ's birth, fell squarely on the winter solstice, a date revered by countless pagan cultures for the rebirth of the sun. Easter, the pinnacle of the Christian year, with its symbols of eggs and rabbits, danced eerily close to ancient spring equinox festivals celebrating fertility and renewal. The elaborate ritual garments and vestments worn by priests, so distinct and sacred, bore striking resemblances to the ornate attire of ancient Egyptian priests or the cult leaders of Mithras, symbolizing their connection to the divine. Even the cross, the ultimate symbol of Christianity, could be found in various forms as pre-Christian iconography across different cultures, representing sun, life, or cosmic order. Ramon began to see not a singular, divine truth handed down, but a tapestry woven from countless threads of human spirituality, adapted, absorbed, and recontextualized over centuries. The Church, he realized, might not have been a pure, unblemished conduit of divine will, but a grand accumulator, a powerful absorber of ancient practices and symbols, layering them with new meaning to establish its own dominion. This realization was both liberating and deeply unsettling, tearing at the foundations of the faith he had once intended to dedicate his life to. The hallowed grounds of San Carlos Seminary, meant to be a crucible of divine calling, became for Ramon a stage for a different kind of awakening. He was in his teens, fresh from a world of duty and inherited expectations, seeking something he couldn't quite name. It was there he first encountered Mateo Calderón. Mateo wasn't in Ramon's section, but his reputation preceded him, a whirlwind of controversial ideas, whispered theories that chipped away at dogma, and an intellectual audacity that unsettled even the most seasoned professors. Mateo was an open book, loud, boisterous, and unafraid to voice his philosophical independence, often questioning the very foundations of the Catholic Church during lectures. To Ramon's more conventional classmates, Calderon was an unmitigated asshole, a callous provocateur. Why would he be such a callous fellow, they'd grumble after a particularly incendiary remark from Mateo, when we are all here to serve God. His booming laugh and unapologetic challenges were mistaken for arrogance. But to Ramon, Mateo was a revelation, a kindred spirit. Their minds, though from different sections and paths, gravitated towards each other. They became fast friends, bonded not by shared piety, but by a shared hunger for truth, a quiet skepticism that festered beneath their pious exteriors. They were both freethinkers, though Ramon's dissent was more internal, Mateo's boisterously external. The seminary refectory, typically a place of solemn silence during meals, was unusually abuzz. Not with the clatter of cutlery, but with the hushed, scandalized murmurs emanating from a table where Mateo Calderon held court. His voice, naturally resonant, cut through the quiet, drawing the disapproving glances of professors and the exasperated sighs of his peers. He was locked in a heated debate with Brother Thomas, a meticulously pious seminarian whose face was already flushed with indignation. "But it's plain heresy, Mateo!" Brother Thomas exclaimed, slapping his palm on the table, making a few plates rattle. "To suggest the very sacraments are borrowed pagan rituals. That's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit." Calderon leaned back, a sardonic smirk playing on his lips, oblivious to the glares from the next table. "Heresy, Thomas? Or history? Show me the text, Thomas, the undisputed, pristine text, written by the hand of God himself, that dictates every precise motion, every chanted syllable of the Mass. You can't. Because the Church, bless its grand, acquisitive heart, has always been a magnificent absorber. The Mass is divine liturgy, instituted by Christ." Thomas insisted, his voice rising. "And its form?" Mateo countered, his voice booming slightly louder. "The vestments? The incense? The very act of elevation? Go read a proper history of mystery cults, Thomas. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Mithraic rituals. They celebrated a symbolic death and rebirth, drank sacred beverages, wore special robes. They had their own sacraments long before Peter stepped foot in Rome. Are we to believe the Holy Spirit simply chose to mimic pagan theatricality? It's God's grace-purifying pagan forms." Thomas retorted, his face now a furious crimson. "Transforming them for his glory. Or conveniently adopting them to make conversion easier for the heathens." Calderon shot back, a glint of challenge in his eye. "Give them their familiar trappings, but switch out the God. It's effective, I grant you. Brilliant, even, from a purely logistical standpoint. But let's not pretend it sprang fully formed from the head of Zeus, or, rather, from a purely divine inspiration unburdened by human pragmatism." Brother Thomas spluttered, unable to formulate an immediate retort. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back with a loud scrape. "You are an arrogant fool, Calderon. A danger to this institution." He stormed away, leaving a trail of scandalized whispers in his wake. Mateo merely chuckled, taking a slow sip of water. He met the eyes of a few other seminarians who were pretending not to listen, including a quiet Ramon Villanueva from another section. A knowing, almost conspiratorial, glance passed between them. Ramon recognized the truth in Mateo's provocations, even as his own mind reeled from the implications. Calderon might be loud, seen as arrogant, and widely disliked for his callous disregard for pieties, but he wasn't wrong. And in a place designed for intellectual conformity, that made him an invaluable, if dangerous, friend. The hypocrisy of the seminary, however, was as illuminating as their friendship. The very classmates who publicly condemned Mateo as a loud, arrogant heretic would, after curfew, discreetly meet him for clandestine drinking sessions outside the seminary walls. Ramon and his small circle of misfit friends were often part of these escapades. Many a night, long after the bells tolled for Compline, they'd find themselves racing through the darkness, scaling the formidable, 7-foot seminary wall, often using a large, overflowing garbage bin as a makeshift step. This was the infamous side of the seminary, where the barbed wires were deliberately twisted, meant to deter any unauthorized egress. Yet, their youthful bravado and thirst for freedom found a way. The night air, thick with the scent of cheap beer and even cheaper perfume, was a stark contrast to the antiseptic solemnity of the seminary. Ramon, Mateo Calderón, and a shifting constellation of their misfit friends, some of the very same classmates who publicly scorned Calderón's heresies, were crammed into a dimly lit bar just beyond the city limits. Laughter, loud and unrestrained, tumbled from their lips, a heady freedom intoxicating as the alcohol. "Another round, Brother Thomas!" Calderón bellowed, his voice already a little slurred, clapping a hand on the back of the perpetually indignant seminarian who was now surprisingly jovial. "Lest the good Lord mistake your sobriety for a lack of thirst for truth." Brother Thomas, loosening his tie, merely chuckled, a far cry from his usual outrage. "You'll be the damnation of us all, Mateo." "Only if damnation means a good time," Calderón retorted, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The seminary, surprisingly, became a period of exhilarating rebellion. They laughed louder, thought harder, and pushed boundaries further than Ramon ever imagined. On this memorable night, fueled by a dangerous mix of curiosity and daring, they even managed to pilfer bottles of the priest's precious mass wine from the sacristy. As the hours bled past curfew, the bar became too tame for Calderón's escalating audacity. A plan, hatched in a haze of fermented grape and youthful bravado, began to form. "The good Father Rector keeps his cellar locked tight," Calderón mused, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "But the sacristy, my friends, often relies on faith alone." Later, under the cloak of deepest night, Ramon, Calderón, and a few others scaled the formidable seminary wall, the overflowing garbage bin a treacherous step, the twisted barbed wire a perilous embrace. They landed in a heap, stifling laughter, their blood thrumming with adrenaline and cheap spirits. Calderón, with a surprising agility for his size, had already managed to slip into the sacristy through a rarely used side door, emerging minutes later with 2 dust-covered bottles of the priest's precious mass wine clutched to his chest, followed by a few more of their brothers stealing the rest. "A toast, my brothers," he whispered, holding up a bottle once they'd stumbled back into the hushed, dark dorm. They crowded around him, breathless, giggling like children. Calderón uncorked one with a practiced ease, and despite their already drunk state, passed the bottle around. Ramon took a generous swig, the rich, sweet wine a potent contrast to the rough beer they'd consumed. It felt illicit, sacredly profane. "To true communion," Calderón declared, his voice a triumphant whisper in the sleeping dormitory, as the stolen wine flowed, a shared secret among their unlikely fraternity. The next morning, the telltale signs of their drunken revelry were impossible to conceal. Glazed eyes, slurred responses during morning prayers, and the lingering scent of cheap communion wine on their breaths gave them all away. They were caught, of course, facing various levels of reprimand, but the shared transgression, the audacious rebellion, forged an even deeper, unspoken bond of camaraderie among Ramon and his misfit circle. It was a memory etched in wine and wild freedom, a final, exhilarating chapter of seminary life before their paths irrevocably diverged. This vibrant, questioning, and rebellious phase, however, was destined to end for Ramon. While his friends, one by one, found their peace or acceptance within the church's strictures and proceeded towards their calling, Ramon could not. The closer he got to the final vows, the clearer the dissonance became. He saw not sacred mystery, but a carefully constructed edifice built on what he now perceived as lies. The rigid doctrines, the selective historical narratives, the very ceremonies themselves, they felt like a monumental scam, designed to control and perpetuate power rather than connect with any divine intelligence. The day of ordination arrived, a day of profound significance for his friends, a day of reckoning for Ramon. As the other ordinands knelt, ready to prostrate themselves face down in symbolic surrender to God and Church, Ramon stood. His heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He felt the weight of centuries of tradition, the expectations of his family, the quiet judgment of his peers. Yet, he could not, would not, perpetuate what he felt was a falsehood. He turned to the bewildered staff and, in a voice that was calm yet resolute, told them he could not go through with it. He simply could not kneel and lie face down. Leaving the seminary, Ramon stepped into a world unburdened by dogma, but adrift without direction. He drifted from company to company, his sharp intellect and natural charm ensuring success in various ventures. He became, for a time, a charming and reckless lover boy, navigating a string of casual relationships, finding fleeting solace in passion. It was a life of fleeting connections and restless pursuits, until he met Isabella, and the scattered fragments of his existence finally found their true north. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the stained-glass window of Ramon's sprawling ancestral library in Cebu, cast dancing motes of dust onto the worn leather of ancient tomes. This was where he fell for Isabella. She was brilliant, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a laugh that could unravel the most complex theological knots. Their discussions, spanning hours and often carrying late into the night, revolved around the very history of the church that had begun to chafe Ramon during his seminary days. Isabella, a historian herself, approached the church's past with a scholar's rigor but a believer's enduring faith. She acknowledged the inconsistencies, the political machinations, the dubious origins of certain traditions, even delving into the proto-Christian goddesses that fascinated her, a research path that, in retrospect, seemed eerily prescient. Yet, she found beauty and truth in its enduring rituals, its capacity for solace, and its aspirational ideals. Ramon, for all his burgeoning skepticism, found himself captivated by her nuanced perspective. He saw the flaws, yes, but he also saw her unwavering conviction, and for her, he was willing to go along, to participate in the rituals he privately questioned, to find a form of peace within the institution, if only to share it with her. Their life together was a delicate balance of intellectual sparring and profound love. They built a home, a shared world of books, laughter, and a quiet understanding that transcended their differing spiritual comfort zones. The announcement of their daughter's impending arrival solidified their happiness, a living testament to their bond. Then, the world shattered. The silence that followed the loss of their daughter, even before she drew her first breath, was deafening. It was a grief that carved a hollow space in their souls, a wound that never truly healed. And just as they began to navigate the contours of this new, fractured existence, tragedy struck again. Isabella, his anchor, his intellectual soulmate, succumbed to cancer with a brutal swiftness that left Ramon reeling. He was alone. Utterly, devastatingly alone. The familiar patterns of his life, once defined by shared inquiry and quiet companionship, dissolved. In the crushing solitude, a chilling thought emerged, almost a whisper from his seminary past: he was meant to be alone, like a priest. It was a cruel irony, a twist of fate that seemed to mock his youthful escape from the vows of celibacy. But Ramon, always one to reframe narrative, chose a different interpretation. He wasn't a forsaken priest, he was a pilgrim. He likened himself to the ancient children of Israel, wandering as nomads around the Promised Land, searching for the truth that lay just beyond their sight. They were not lost, but on a sacred quest, destined to wander until they collectively understood enough to finally enter the land promised to them. For Ramon, that promised land was not a geographical place, but the ultimate truth, the complete understanding of the divine intelligence he knew existed beyond any man-made institution. With a substantial amount of money saved from his successful ventures, augmented by a generous inheritance from his family, Ramon shed the remnants of his old life. He would no longer be a corporate success story, nor a serial lover, nor a man tied to a single home. He would become a seeker. From that moment, he embarked on a solitary, global odyssey, traversing ancient lands, digging through forgotten archives, seeking out whispers of vanished cults and religious oddities. His grief became his fuel, his loneliness his constant companion, driving him ever onward in a tireless search for the elusive, singular truth he knew lay buried beneath centuries of dogma and deception. The crushing weight of grief after Isabella's death, coupled with the profound disillusionment from his seminary days, spurred Ramon into a new, restless existence. His inherited wealth, once a silent comfort, became his fuel, financing a burgeoning obsession that evolved from casual inquiry into a consuming hobby. It began subtly, in conversations with the people he met on the road, old friends from his academic circles, new acquaintances in bustling markets, or quiet scholars in dusty libraries. He listened, truly listened, to their local lore, their superstitions, their inexplicable practices. He found himself constantly wondering about the silent stories etched into the landscape. Why did so many ancient landmarks, from stone circles in Europe to temples in Southeast Asia, seem to align with the stars, marking solstices, equinoxes, and celestial events with breathtaking precision? This led him to ponder the peculiar habits of his own homeland, the Philippines. He noticed, time and again, how a great many houses in the Philippines, particularly the older ones, would invariably face the east, or at the very least, ensure they had a door and a window to always have openings from both ends, the east and the west. Was it merely for ventilation, or was there an older, forgotten purpose tied to the rising and setting sun? Then there was the deeply ingrained Filipino superstition of oro, plata, matter, gold, silver, death, whispered when counting the steps on a staircase. Every third step, if it landed on matter, was deemed unlucky, often leading builders to add or subtract steps to avoid the ominous count. Ramon questioned this. Was it simply superstition, or a distorted memory of an ancient rhythm, a hidden numerological code connected to prosperity, scarcity, and oblivion? He began to see these patterns everywhere. Simple house designs in Japan subtly echoed solar paths, while the intricate temple carvings in India practically screamed with astronomical alignments. The symbols, the orientations, the numerical patterns, they were remarkably similar across disparate cultures, too consistent to be mere coincidence. His relentless cross-referencing, his scholar's instinct for connecting disparate dots, finally led him to a term that clicked everything into place: archaeoastronomy. Fueled by this new revelation, he devoured every online resource, every digital archive. As he meticulously examined images on the internet, satellite views of ancient ruins, detailed photographs of petroglyphs, illustrations from centuries-old manuscripts, he noticed some symbols, recurring motifs of celestial bodies, animals, and geometric patterns that sent a chill down his spine. They were strikingly reminiscent of diagrams he'd once glimpsed in a forbidden text back in the seminary, tucked away in a dusty corner of the restricted section, symbols he dismissed as mere pagan curiosities at the time. From that moment on, Ramon became a true jet-setter, driven by an insatiable thirst for truth. He traversed continents, from the ancient pyramids and celestial observatories of South America to the hidden caves and sacred mountains of China, his passport a testament to his tireless quest. He sought out forgotten sites, deciphered archaic languages, and engaged in endless conversations with academics, shamans, and local elders. He was no longer just a grieving widower, but a man possessed by a profound, global mystery, chasing the echoes of an ancient celestial intelligence that seemed to have guided humanity's earliest steps. In one of his travels, Ramon was in Egypt. The Egyptian sun beat down on the ancient dust motes dancing in the air of Aswan, warming Ramon's linen shirt. He sat cross-legged on a worn rug, sipping strong, sweet tea in the shade of a makeshift awning. Across from him, a group of local men, the Hawaiians, keepers of stories passed down through generations, gestured languidly, their faces etched with the wisdom of the desert. Ramon, with his polite Arabic and genuine curiosity, had quickly earned their trust. "Why, Sidi Ramon," began old Sate, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he exhaled a puff of shisha smoke. "You ask many questions about the stones. The tall ones." He pointed vaguely towards the distant, unfinished obelisks still half buried in the quarry. Ramon nodded, his gaze earnest. "The obelisks, Sate. They fascinate me. They are so ancient, so powerful. But what I always wondered, and what few can explain, is why the Holy Fathers in Rome have so many of them. Great, ancient stones, carved by your ancestors, standing in the heart of the Catholic Church's city." Another man, younger, named Karim, shifted. "Ah, but the priests of Rome are clever, Sidi. They know what power is. The Romans, they did not build these. They simply took them. And the Church, well, they took them from the Romans." Sate nodded slowly. "It is not so simple as taking, my son. The stones are like vessels. They reach to the sky, yes? They draw down the light, the energy of Ra, of the stars. Our ancestors, they knew this. They were not just monuments. They were antennae." He tapped his temple. "For certain purposes. The priests of the old gods," Karim added, "they understood the lines. The flow. The energies from above and from below. They marked the turning of the seasons, the paths of the sun and stars. He paused, then looked at Ramon with a knowing glint. And the church, Sidi Ramon, they too are priests. Perhaps they understood, eventually, that some powers cannot be destroyed, only repurposed. Only claimed. Ramon leaned forward. So, you believe they brought them to Rome not just as spoils of war, but to harness that power? To integrate it into their own spiritual landscape? Sate chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. A conqueror takes what is valuable, Sidi. And what is more valuable than power that reaches into the heavens, that aligns with the unseen rhythms? They say the light of the sun, our sun, still touches the tips of those stones, even in Rome. And perhaps, it still speaks to those who know how to listen. The church knows how to listen to many things, no. Ramon felt a familiar clouding in his mind, the same unsettling realization he'd had in the seminary. The parallel was too stark. The church, in its infinite capacity for absorption, had not merely erected pagan monuments as symbols of triumph. They had, perhaps, understood their deeper function, subtly weaving ancient, potent energies into the very fabric of their Christianized city. The obelisks, those silent, towering giants, were not merely trophies, but perhaps a testament to a grand, millennia-long appropriation of power, a testament to the church's ancient, hidden understanding of archaeoastronomy. The conversation with the Hawaiians only solidified his conviction. The sacred was far more complex, and far less pure, than most believers could ever comprehend. The present. Ramon de los Reyes Villanueva, back in his ancestral home in Cebu City, sat on the veranda overlooking the shimmering expanse of the Mactan Channel. The salty breeze carried the scent of the sea and distant traffic, a familiar comfort he'd returned to after years of restless globetrotting. His tablet lay open beside him, not displaying news, but a series of encrypted emails. These weren't from academic journals or historical societies, they were from old seminary classmates, men he'd once scaled walls and swigged stolen mass wine with, now monsignors and bishops, some even assigned to sensitive posts within the Vatican itself. The emails had started subtly months ago, hushed references to unusual directives, unexplained reassignments, and a pervasive sense of shadows extending into the sacred halls. At first, Ramon had dismissed them as clerical gossip, perhaps the inevitable paranoia of men enmeshed in an ancient bureaucracy. But then the tone shifted. His former classmates, now clearly rattled, began hinting at something far more unsettling. Subject: unforeseen alignments. Read one email from a monsignor assigned to the Vatican Library, a man Ramon remembered as rigorously orthodox. Ramon, forgive this unusual correspondence, but certain anomalies in the historical records have surfaced. Directives from above, far above, compel us to recontextualize certain astrological charts, particularly those pertaining to pre-Nicene periods. It is perplexing and disturbing. Another, from a bishop known for his administrative acumen, assigned to a curia office, was more direct. Ramon, old friend, there's a tightening. Resources are being diverted, and personnel with specific historical expertise are being redirected. We hear whispers of a council, not one we know, concerned with ancient activations. It feels less like church politics and more like something else entirely. We've seen too many good men reassigned for asking too many questions. And then, the most alarming email, from a classmate he'd once shared illicit philosophical debates with, now a bishop in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The current climate is charged. Inquiries, quiet but insistent, are being made into specific theological interpretations concerning primordial covenants and solar fire. It's reaching into archives thought long forgotten, touching on subjects. Ramon, remember those forbidden texts from the restricted section? The ones Father Antonio would have had apoplexy over? They are being referenced, not discreetly, but openly, in very high circles. These hints, fragmented and veiled, began to coalesce into a chilling picture for Ramon. The church, his former spiritual home, was stirring, not with theological debate, but with a clandestine purpose. This was no mere heresy hunt, it was a response to something profound. Then, the news broke across the screen of his tablet. a corporate tower in downtown Tehran, imploded from within. No fire, no smoke, just a perfect, devastating collapse. The official reports blamed structural failure, an unforeseen tremor. Ramon, however, felt a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with engineering. The pattern was too precise. That night, as he stood on the veranda of his Cebu home, looking up at the vast Philippine sky, the stars seemed to thrum with a subtle energy. He wasn't looking for satellites or modern constellations. His eyes, trained by years of obsessive study of ancient astronomy and celestial mechanics, were seeking something else. And there it was, a specific, archaic alignment of stars, one that echoed diagrams found in forgotten Mesopotamian tablets and obscure Roman mythria. It was a pattern he had dismissed as astrological folly in his younger days, but now, a chilling connection began to form. This alignment, so rare and profound, was intimately tied to the Mithraic cult he had long studied, a cult that worshipped a solar deity and a covenant of fire. The conjunction of the Tehran news and the celestial revelation gnawed at him. As a scholar who constantly updated himself on anomalies in religious history, his fingers instinctively typed keywords into obscure digital archives. And then he found it, a familiar name, Ava Nazari, and her audacious research, the Solar Sacrament, traces of Mithra in pre-Nicene iconography, surprisingly uploaded to the Gutenberg site. His old friend, Professor Calderon, had often spoken of Nazari's brilliance and her dangerously revisionist theories. Ramon immediately purchased a digital copy of her full research, devouring it over sleepless nights. As he delved into her intricate arguments about Mithra as a primal guardian of covenants, a force twisted and fragmented over millennia, a chilling clarity descended upon him. He saw it. The implosion in Ray, Iran. It wasn't structural failure. It was the undoing of a covenant, the disruption of an ancient seal, a direct, raw act of energy, perhaps even a ritualistic one. It was the Watchers, as Nazari's later, unpublished theories hinted, attempting to contain or perhaps even unleash something primal, something tied to Mithra himself. The realization sent a jolt of terror through him, not of the external danger, but of his own sanity. He looked at his notes, filled with arcane symbols, stellar charts, and connections between disparate historical events. A conspiracy nut, he whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ash. The thought of ending up in a loony bin, dismissed as a crackpot with wild, unprovable theories, caused a profound trepidation. He was a historian, a linguist, a man of logic, not a prophet of hidden wars. Yet, the quiet voice of his late wife, Isabel, seemed to echo in his mind, reminding him of her own research into proto-Christian goddesses, a path that had felt similarly dangerous before her death. No. This wasn't madness. This was pattern recognition, a scholar's instinct honed to an unnerving degree. The pieces fit, however bizarrely. He had to know if Ava Nazari, this brilliant, audacious scholar, also saw the same terrifying truth. With a deep breath, Ramon Villanueva made a decision. He would gather his meager belongings, secure his research, and begin the journey. He had to find Ava. He had to share these weird theories, however outlandish they sounded, because somewhere, deep down, he knew they held a truth more terrifying than any conventional explanation. He was a pawn, perhaps, in a game he barely understood, but he would not play it blindly. From Ramon's journal, a web unraveling. The encrypted emails from my old seminary comrades, now ensconced in the Vatican's labyrinthine corridors, were growing increasingly disturbing. The whispers about ancient activations and primordial covenants felt less like theological abstractions and more like urgent warnings. One particular thread, pieced together from veiled references and thinly disguised concerns, chilled me to the bone. The church, it seemed, was actively tracking a man in Lisbon. They didn't name him, but the descriptions, a sudden, inexplicable physical transformation, a sense of internal fire, resonated with whispers of ancient texts I'd stumbled upon in forgotten archives. My only tenuous link to this unfolding drama, a fragile thread woven through dense academic prose, was Ava Nazari. Her audacious work on Mithraic persistence, a topic once dismissed as fringe, now felt chillingly prescient. I had to reach out. Email from Ramon Villanueva to Ava Nazari. Subject: an unsettling intersection of scholarship and current events. Dear Dr. Nazari, forgive this unsolicited email. My name is Ramon Villanueva. You may know me tangentially, perhaps through Professor Calderon. He spoke of your work with a mixture of exasperation and profound respect during my own seminary days many years ago. Your recent publication, The Solar Sacrament, Traces of Mithra in Pre-Nicene Iconography, has been, to put it mildly, a revelation. It resonates deeply with some of my own independent research, pushing boundaries I've long felt constrained by. Your thesis on Mithra as a distorted derivative of a broader, older solar deity, a guardian of contracts and cosmic truth, is not merely revisionist. It feels like the key to an overarching understanding. My own global odyssey has led me to a similar, albeit less articulated, conclusion, that many of the world's diverse religious traditions, from the Vedic hymns to the ancient Egyptian rituals, even down to the earliest forms of Christianity, seem to echo a singular, primordial current. It's as if there's an underlying, universal spiritual grammar that has been recycled and recontextualized into the myriad faiths we see today, obscuring a shared, deeper truth. The symbols, the sun, the serpent, the sacred sacrifice, transcend specific deities, suggesting a common origin for humanity's understanding of the divine, a kind of proto-religion that underpins them all. This brings me, rather abruptly, to my true purpose in contacting you. I've been following the news of the corporate tower implosion in Tehran with a growing sense of unease, particularly in conjunction with certain stirrings I'm observing from sources within the Vatican. These are not mere political maneuvers, they hint at a deeper, ancient conflict. Your work on Mithra and the Watchers, a term I've only ever encountered in the most obscure texts, seems uncannily connected. Could you possibly offer any comment on the Tehran event, or perhaps shed some light on the apparent focus of certain ecclesiastical factions on ancient activations? I have reason to believe this extends to individuals, not just abstract concepts. I understand this is highly irregular, but your scholarship feels uniquely positioned to comprehend the gravity of what may be unfolding. Sincerely, Ramon Villanueva. Email from Ava Nazari to Ramon Villanueva. Subject: an unsettling intersection of scholarship and current events. Dear Mr. Villanueva, I confess, your email arrived at a most opportune, or perhaps unsettling, time. Your name does ring a bell from Professor Calderon's often colorful anecdotes. And your assessment of the solar sacrament is, dare I say, perceptive. Your theories on a proto-religion and the recycling of ancient spiritual grammar resonate powerfully with my own, often unvoiced, convictions. Indeed, some of my earliest and most dangerous thoughts, those I chose not to publish, delve precisely into that territory, tracing symbols across millennia to a singular source. Regarding Tehran, and the stirrings you observe in Rome, yes. It sounds precisely like my recent activities, or rather, the activities that have found me. The implosion, as you suspect, was no accident, and the attention from certain quarters is, shall we say, more than academic. I've recently undergone a rather profound, and somewhat terrifying, activation that seems inextricably linked to the very subjects we both study. In fact, I'm preparing to travel to London imminently. I need to access some of my unfinished research, old notes and theories that I'd, perhaps foolishly, left behind. They may hold keys to understanding what is now very actively unfolding around me. It feels less like research and more like a necessary pilgrimage into my own forgotten insights. Thank you for reaching out, Ramon. Your email is validating in a world that suddenly feels very, very strange. Best, Ava Nazari. From Ramon's journal, The Puppeteer's Strings. Ava's reply, though guarded, was a chilling confirmation. It wasn't merely a coincidence, it was a collision. Her subtle acknowledgement of activities that have found her and her urgent need to retrieve unfinished research in London painted a stark picture. My suspicions, long nurtured in the quiet corners of my mind, solidified into a terrifying certainty. This was no random theological tremor. The clues from my Vatican comrades, the veiled references to ancient activations, the redirected resources, and now Ava's direct, if understated, corroboration, spun a chilling web. The Church, in its visible machinations, was only one layer. Behind it, controlling the flow of information, suppressing knowledge, and subtly manipulating events, were the Watchers. I'd initially termed them puppeteers in my private musings, a vast, unseen network, embedded in the very institutions I'd once sought to understand. They were the ones pulling the strings, ensuring equilibrium through suppression, as one old text had cryptically hinted. But as I connected the dots, Ava's activation, the Tehran implosion, the Church's pursuit of the man in Lisbon, who, I now understood, must be another activated individual, I also noticed something else. Something subtle, almost imperceptible. There were delays. Communication channels would inexplicably lag when information about certain unusual directives passed through. Equipment malfunctions would plague operations targeted at particular individuals. Vehicles would experience sudden, non-fatal breakdowns. It was a counterforce, acting with equal, if not greater, clandestine skill. Someone, or something, was actively trying to block the Watchers, creating friction in their carefully orchestrated suppression. It was a silent, unseen war, fought in the digital ether and the mundane realities of everyday life. My last email to Ava, pressing for more details, offering my assistance, went unanswered. A full day, then two, passed in silence. That silence was louder than any alarm bell. It screamed of interception, of a net tightening around her. She had said London, to retrieve her unfinished research. Her forgotten insights. The same insights that now made her a target. I looked out at the Mactan Channel, the placid waters belying the tempest gathering far across the globe. My quest for truth, once a solitary academic pursuit, had become something far more urgent. My path was clear. I had to go to London. Not to visit a king, but to find the Queen of Fire.